Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Moses and you are listening to the AHP Leader podcast. This is the second series of a 3-set of podcasts looking at changing the culture of conversations, and this one specifically aimed at new leaders of our profession. So the first podcast really looked at addressing some of the challenges that we have in starting the conversations around race, culture and ethnicity within the AHP workforce. So we acknowledged and apologised, and this is where we really start to think about some actions that need to happen. But before we can do that, we really need to understand. And we've used some of the feedback from the first podcast to start some second conversations around some of the real challenges that people have, and also some of the opportunities for change, as well as some of the really positive examples people can give us about what inclusivity looks like. So without further ado, I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do. So Mariam, can I come to you first, please? Oh.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, I'm Mariam. I'm a speech and language therapist. I work in the early years. So that's primarily children 0 to 5. I work for the NHS, and yeah.
Thank you. Kieran.
Hi, I'm Kieran and I'm a second-year physiotherapy student at the University of Winchester.
Thank you. Great to have you, Kieran. Larry.
Hi, good evening all. My name is Larry Koyama. I am a physiotherapist by profession, specialising in musculoskeletal healthcare. Currently, I'm head of program at the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy for FCP Implementation.
Thank you. Arnie.
Hi there. So I'm Arnie Puntis. I'm a physiotherapist. I work with older adults in rehab because of complexity and frailty. And I work in London.
Thank you. Shafak.
Hello, I am a private speech and language therapist, so I work independently. I'm based in South London, working predominantly with kids, but I work with adults as well. Most of my work is consultancy, online, and I do lots of media work. So I've done TV shows because my passion is raising awareness of communication and speech and language therapy. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Jackie.
Hi everyone, I'm Jackie Walumbe. I am also a physiotherapist and I work in pain management within inpatients in a hospital in London in the NHS. And I'm also a clinical doctoral research fellow researching the same topic. So that's chronic pain self-management as part of my PhD.
Thank you, Jackie. Now, we do have some non-video participants, some which are going to be vocal on the podcast tonight, some which are just in the peripheries and communicating via chat. And we do have some in a separate waiting room who are going to communicate as and when with any member of the panel. And the reason for that was just to get some real diversity and to make it completely inclusive for not everyone that's bold enough to come and be recorded on a live podcast. So Wendy, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Wendy Vaughan. I am a community physiotherapist working with older adults, and I'm also a part-time senior lecturer at the University St George's in Kingston.
Thank you, Wendy. And we have David as well, but his internet is a bit patchy. David, are you there?
Yes, I'm David. I'm a second-year physiotherapy student down at Bournemouth University, and I'm here to listen and learn how I can be a better ally for the future.
Thank you, David. So we've got a real mix on the panel tonight, some new faces. So this is really, really appreciated from my behalf. And I know from the feedback we've had from the first podcast that this is a real opportunity to start changing behaviours of our new leaders. And by that, we want to start thinking about undergraduate level as well. So we listened from some of the feedback and the conversations we'd had from podcast 1. And I'm so grateful for Kieran and David for stepping up and being part of this, because that is really brave. So, as I mentioned, the feedback from the other podcast has formed a small part of how we're going to start this conversation. And actually across all 3 themes of leadership, or stages of leadership, new leaders, emerging and senior leaders, there was a definite feel, and a definite acknowledgement and a definite people sharing of their experiences that as a BAME AHP, they had been held back in their career progression for a number of reasons actually, and some really powerful stories came through. And for some it might be circumstance, for some it might be opportunity, for some it might be specifically because they were a person of colour. And I want to start by opening this up to the panel, and maybe Jackie, if I could come to you first on, you know, how that sits with you, and if you have anything you can share.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me. I mean, it's a number of years ago when I kind of entered into the professional space, you know, initially as a student and then, you know, as a qualified person. But it took me a while to work out that that's what was happening, if that makes sense. So there was a sense of, I was working quite hard and trying to kind of go for little awards. Like in my trust, we had these little like trust awards where you'd get a little certificate saying that you'd done a good job with a class or something like that. And I was noticing that I was kind of getting left behind with some of these awards, and I hadn't really ever thought, oh, that's going to be something about race or institutional racism. It never really occurred to me. It was always quite internalized. I was like, this is something that I need to do better and I need to work harder. So I think when people are saying that there's an issue with progression, I definitely think I've seen it in my career. And one of the ways that I've tried to surmount it is not entirely reasonable. So a bit of my background is I'm from Kenya. So I came to university as an immigrant. So I had that as an alternative identity as well. And so I had this kind of eye on politics, because the politics changed very rapidly throughout my career, from being very welcoming and inviting to suddenly shifting every few years to you're no longer under shortage of occupation and things like that. So I think when those two things collided, it felt quite, you're not welcome in this country and you're not welcome in this place. You know, I kind of thought, am I going to change the system? That never occurred to me. I think what I ended up doing was moving. So I left my job and applied for jobs in London. So I trained up north and I thought, it's not going to happen here. I was applying for jobs and not getting interviewed or getting offers and getting the offers retracted. So I just thought, London, that's better, isn't it? And surprisingly for me, London was better. It was more diverse. There was more people like me in the departments, in the hospitals, and I felt that it was easier to progress. And I think what came across really strongly for me was allies in the leaders that I had, I would say from London onwards. So I had head of a department who would say to me, this is really great, I want to support you to do an MSc. I wasn't thinking of doing an MSc, I was just having my best life, and my manager was like, I think you should really go for this, I think you should try it out. And I think that encouragement from someone in a position who should know, I felt that gave me the confidence to think, well, if they think I can do it, I might as well try it out. And this same person throughout my, I suppose, middle of my career was such a strong ally, not just to me, but to other people in the department. And I suppose physio is very competitive, and there's a sense of me first, you know, I'm going to be that person on ahead. But this leader did that thing where it was like, look, I know those people are really loud and shouty and they sound like they're doing it, but I think you can do just as well, if not better. And, you know, putting me forward for leadership programs or for mentorship schemes and things like that, which then in themselves helped me build up like confidence. And, you know, the capacity and the capability was already there. But I think that ability to step into a space where you feel that you're not wanted, that really came from the support of people, and not in major senior leadership roles. These were my band 6 supervisors, my managers, and, you know, when I was at the time working in MSK. So I think this is such a good opportunity for people who don't know yet that they're in that position of power and privilege to do something extraordinary and just rather than focusing on competition and that person must be the best person, is almost casting your eye slightly back and thinking, I know that person seems a little bit quiet. I might get to know them and see what it is that might be hiding behind that.
So
Yeah,
you've picked on so much there. So if I'm going to draw on a couple of things to progress that point, is about confidence, and what commonly the people that I've had physical conversations with in that band, who have now got the band 6 roles, but it's been maybe 2 or 3 years after their white counterparts that they graduated with got those first promotions, they were told they lacked confidence and they lacked leadership skills. So what some people done was then invest outside of practice to get those additional skills where their white counterparts didn't have to do that. And that was a common theme that came through for me. Has anyone got anything to touch on about like confidence or around additional skill sets? Shafak, can I come down to you?
Hey, thank you. It was really lovely hearing Jackie's account, and she's done superbly well. I'm really proud of her. A personal experience that I just like to share with everyone. I'm feeling very brave because Rachel provided this forum for us to talk about experiences. Going for a band 6 interview because my fellow, my fellow MSc professionals, they felt I should go for it. So very supportive. Went for the interview, and 2 panel members. One was a lecturer of mine who was very encouraging, and the other lady on the panel, she just looks at me and she's like, "Are you comfortable being a face of the department of SLT of this hospital?" And for me, that was a complete blow at my face during an interview. And I was like, I'm comfortable about it, but what about you? We're speech therapists, occupational health therapists, allied health professionals. We're trained to read people. We're trained to pick up on communication and paralanguage. And to have someone say that to your face at an interview, are you prepared to be the face of this department? And she was obviously like, no, I don't want you to be here for this job. And she was like, no one's going to be able to help you, Shafak, if you get this job. And I was like, that's not what you're supposed to say, but if you don't want me to be applying for this job, sure, And obviously, I didn't get the position.
Oh, what's really sad is you said obviously there, and that is the exact cultural behaviour that we need to change. So that your story is not isolated, let me tell you, from the people that have even just reached out in this short period of time.
Right.
So, Jackie, you talked about competition. Now, in this band 5, getting your first band 6 role within the AHP professions, this is endemic in us. Like, you don't see it so much in nursing. Nurses are more than happy to be band 5s, learning about their profession, taking that time, doing preceptorship. For us, sometimes it's like, when can we get a band 6 job? When, who gets it first? That competition is absolutely embedded in us. I don't know if anyone wants to agree or disagree with that.
So a couple of things. So I think the first thing about confidence, I think, again, totally agree, but I think confidence is cyclical. So people obviously will lack confidence if they're not given opportunities, but also they lack confidence if they don't see themselves in particular positions. But also these people are very intelligent. They can read a room, they can see scenarios, they can see a culture and experience it. So that in itself can drain confidence. Simple conversations and what Shafak had, or things that you have, you can see in organizations where a friend of a friend is all of a sudden very senior, or, oh, I worked with this person before, now there's 5 or 6 of them within an organization. So people can see all of those things, and I think that's very common. And also I think on the thing about nursing, I think, yes, it's true, definitely nurses are much more happy to stay as band 5s for a number of years, and we're talking about AHPs, but even within nurses, you will see that all the band 5s typically would be your BME staff, and maybe a few band 6s, very few 7s or 8s. And often the people that don't go on to become 7 or 8s would have been people that they've supervised before. So that's a really common culture within those organizations. And more specifically to the kind of physio and AHP culture in general, there is a lot to be said for, as good as it is, every kind of clinical lead or someone that's progressed quite far in their profession that I've come across from a BME background has always had a white ally. As nice as that is, it's also terribly sad that that's often required, that you need that champion to speak for you. It's definitely been the scenario in my case where I've had people champion me, and sometimes they've had to almost go against the grain a little bit, which I mean, to be honest, it's got easier as I've progressed, because I think barriers do sometimes get a little bit easier the further up you go until you get to a certain stage. But so it's very important to have allies, but it's also terribly sad that we need allies to progress in our careers.
Yeah, can I just jump in there? So you're talking about sort of having white allies, and I think the other thing is that if BAME people have got to positions of leadership, it might be because, it sounds awful, but the white people identify with them, or they identify with white people. So you talk a certain way, you went to the same school, you have similar interests. So for that white person, they see you as being one of them. And I've definitely had that experience in my career. I've actually had one of my managers tell me that, you know, well, you're like me, you're just white middle class. And I was like, I'm not white. But, you know, she thought that was being inclusive, and she thought that was being encouraging to say that I've made it because I'm now being viewed as being a white person, but didn't realise actually how insulting that is. But I think, and you can kind of see it quite a lot, that people employ people that look like them, talk like them, sound like them.
I couldn't agree more. That you hit the nail on the head, 100%. Because even you know, I talk about this sometimes. My wife says don't use the word privilege, but even I feel sometimes a bit privileged because I've grown up in an English culture, because I'm male, and there are certain advantages that come with that. You know, I know some phenomenal colleagues who have slightly different cultures because they've grown up in different countries, and obviously come over, got a master's, done all sorts of stuff, are incredible clinicians. Come to go for leadership roles. Well, you haven't got leadership skills. You know, what does that even mean when the role then goes to someone who is nowhere near qualified or experienced, but you're willing to invest and train them? And then not to talk about, you know, the kind of discrepancies that we often see with those that are on disciplinaries or warnings, and that kind of those microaggressions that we often see.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, Arnie, you've just struck a chord there with a couple of things you've said, and some of the feedback that people have got is about having to become anglicised to fit in, and that's one of the things they've done, and then they feel like they've lost their cultural identity. So colour is there, colour is visual, but it's changing the way you speak, changing your behaviours. For some people, it's around religion as well, and I think that some of the feedback that people have shared is absolutely cements what you've just said. And isn't that so sad? Isn't, because people feel like they need to fit into that British white culture in order to get where that British white person is. And we talked about role modeling a lot in the last podcast, didn't we? But that is part of it as well.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, like, I've even changed my name. Like, my real name isn't Arnie, my full name's Arndy, but no one can pronounce it, so I've shortened it, so it's Arnie. So now everyone knows me as Arnie. But, you know, I've been reflecting a lot on that in the past couple of weeks and thinking that's really sad that I've unconsciously anglicised myself so that I'll be accepted more. And I think that's quite common with people that have names that people find difficult to pronounce, is that you just shorten it, or people shorten it on your behalf, which is, you know, even worse.
Yeah, Mariam.
Yeah, I think the desire for leadership and the desire to progress is you know, an interesting one in itself. I think it speaks to, like, the wider culture that we live in, the capitalist structures, and the way our society is organised is that's how progress is measured, and that's how we come to also recognise our own self-worth in terms of how fast we've progressed or how much we've progressed. But I think it's also it's not without its challenges. Actually, I find that the people I speak to who are further and further up that ladder, the less creative and original they become in the way they think about things. And so as a current band 6, I find myself in a really precarious position, in that I've enjoyed that kind of that progress, if you like, from being a band 5 to a band 6, which, by the way, was a very lonely journey. But that aside, I'm enjoying being a band 6. I'm measuring my, personally reflecting on this, I'm measuring my own clinical competence and thinking, I'm a band 6, that means that I'm doing more, I'm worth more, I'm doing okay. But actually, that next step, for example, will be something that I become more and more nervous about taking. Not because I'm afraid of, I think, to be honest with you, I think I'm very capable of being a band 7 within as a speech and language therapist within the NHS. But what I'm nervous about is that it's going to require me to abandon parts of myself. And I see that in most people that I've encountered so far within speech and language therapy who have been in bands above me, in that there's a need, or potentially a need, but I sense that there's been an abandonment of parts of yourself. And I'm quite enjoying being quite radical in how I think. And if I have to drop that, I'd rather be a band 6 for the rest of my career.
So this is when we get into institutional type of oppression and cyclical behaviours and reinforcement of
I work
values.
within the NHS with the values which I totally believe in and align myself with, but actually there's no moving away from the fact that it's an institution which is built on oppression and has huge issues around structural inequality and structural racism. And so the more clinical contact that I have, which traditionally, in my profession at least, the further up that trajectory you go, the less contact you actually have on the ground doing the actual job. I think it makes me question why leadership and what is leadership?
Yeah.
Why do I have a desire for leadership? And what does leadership mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. Shafak, can I come into you, and then I'm going to go to Wendy. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick point, because I think it's very, it connects really well to what Arnie has just said and what Mariam has just said. I recently had this conversation with a fellow BAME leader. He works quite senior, not in the NHS. What he said to me was, you've had difficulty progressing in healthcare because you don't fit the specific image. You don't look like a white middle-class girl. You're not going to be able to progress as easily. And this is a senior person telling me. And I said, yes, I have battled barriers, and I am where I am today, and I'm able to talk because I have the confidence of speaking out about it. If I was, on this platform just 5-10 years back, I would not have had the confidence, but because I've achieved, and I'm a BAME, as you say, my religious identity is very obvious. His words to me were just very directly, you don't fit the image, the look, it's going to be really hard for you.
Thank you for sharing that, Shafak. Wendy.
Hi, yeah, so there's just a few points I wanted to pick up on, actually. So going back to Jackie, talking about trying to progress to a band 6 and finding an ally and things like that, and I totally understand that. So I remember being a band 5, well, actually before I became a band 5, I'd come into physio with a master's degree as well as a physio degree. And I went for about 5 band 5 interviews, and I was actually working in these teams, and I just couldn't get the job. And by the 5th interview, I actually knew the interview inside out, back to front, knew every single answer, and I still didn't get that band 5. Luckily, I did get a band 5, and I had a really great manager who did build my confidence, who did believe in me, gave me all these opportunities. And it is really sad, and I was having a conversation the other day with one of my colleagues, and I was saying it's really sad that we, in order to speak up about inequalities and racism, we do have to look to our white counterparts in order to be our voice. Because if we speak, it's like, here we go again, or, and it becomes a problem. And, I just wanted to say that about the leadership things as well, is that what I observed when I was more in the acute trust, I'd say, is that maybe the white physios, because I'm a physio, the white physios would, yeah, they would all be together and they would kind of understand. And I always felt like I didn't understand because I didn't speak the same. I didn't come from the same background, and I was very, very different. And I think it's important that leaders do take note of other people, and it's not just about because someone looks like you, because actually, essentially, we all are the same in terms of how we feel and emotions and things like that. Yeah, I think change has come in, and I've seen lots of change, which has been really, really, really good. And another thing I wanted to speak about was the physios being really competitive and nurses not being competitive. And sorry, I can't remember the gentleman's name that made a point about them, most of them being black who are band 5s and 6s. And I remember when I was wanting to train to be a physio, and that's what I was told to go and do, go and be a nurse, because that's what you do, but you cannot be a physio because you don't fit. Basically, I was told I don't fit because I was black and I was female. And I think there's some of that undercurrent is still there. Yes, the change is coming, but I think it's still kind of there. I mean, we're seeing more ethnic people coming into physio and moving up into higher bandings, but it's a slow change, but it's a good change.
Yeah, Wendy, I hear you. I think you're absolutely correct in what you say. I've witnessed it myself, and you know, in my younger days, I've definitely seen it in myself as well. And I think the acknowledgement phase we now need to be in as a profession, and this is just wider than physio, this is across all the allied health professionals. We can see that from the diversity statistics and the ethnicity statistics. It's something that really needs that organizational change to really understand, you know, this whole thing about identity and how we identify as a profession and what that looks like, because it's so much more than the professionals. It's the patients, it's the carers, it's the families, it's what makes up our country. And it's just everything you've just said there, it completely strikes a chord with me. And I want to actually come down to Kieran, and I'm so sorry for putting you on the spot, Kieran, here, but right. Our students within the allied health professionals, but specifically physios, probably because they are the biggest, you know, collective student voice in terms of undergraduate patients, and I am honorary president for a student group, which does lack diversity even within the student reference group. And what experience do you have? Does this ring true what the panel have said in your student experience?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like the whole leadership thing, so what does a leader look like? And if you asked me this question at the start, so at the start of first year, I would have said someone that doesn't look like me, because I've never seen someone that does look like me in a position of leadership. And that whole idea in itself is going to be a barrier to anyone who wants to get into the field, because if you don't see anyone that looks like you in a position of seniority, you're going to think, right, it's not accessible for me. So the first thing is, what does the leader look like? And then also, what do they sound like? Do they sound like they've been brought up in a white middle class area? Because again, if you're a student not from that area, you're going to think, right, I can't be that leader. So I think touching on what Larry said earlier, it seems like there's a kind of practice of nepotism almost in terms of getting into these high positions. But I think the questions need to be asked about how we can legitimize the interview process to kind of eliminate all those things outside the competence of the practitioner to try and make it as fair as possible.
Yeah, completely agree. Do you think there's more work that needs to be done within the HEIs? Do you think there's a space there as a collective to really understand, like we're trying to do within our professions? Do you think there's work to be done?
Yeah, yeah, there is basically. I think we're going to touch on this later, but I've got kind of a few thoughts on what we can do to improve that. So
brilliant. I look forward to hearing that. Jackie, can I come into you?
I think I just wanted to touch on just what Kieran said, because it just a memory pronged into my mind just as you said it. So back in the day when I was doing my exams, third year physio exams, I passed all my written exams and I failed almost all my practical face-to-face exams. And when we went to do our resits, it was pretty much people from BAME people, or people with or working class people with different accents in that group. And we're all really good friends now, but I think at the time we were like, what's this about? You know, we can't all just be rubbish, because we're clearly, you know, passing some placements or not. But it did feel like there was a separation between capability and clinical kind of competence, and these softs or subjective skills, I suppose, where they say, you didn't do that thing, that I'm not going to tell you what it was. So I do think that I'm hoping that the environment has changed over time, and the HEIs are taking this into consideration. But, you know, I'm pretty senior, but I've never been invited or been in the space to examine physio students. I've done it for medical students, but never, you know, that sense of, I would like to do something to level up this gap, but I can't see my people. They're just not there in like where I am.
Arnie, thanks, Jackie.
Just want to speak back to Jackie about the point she made about the attainment difference, and it's really depressing, but it hasn't changed. And I know, and there was some research done recently at London University looking at that attainment gap, and it showed that, yeah, when it was written exams, people did well, and then BAME people did well, and then when it came to face-to-face or it came to placement, they actually were scoring, I think it was 10% lower than their white counterparts. And you know, that's just horrific. And I don't know how long ago you trained, but you know, nothing's changed since then, which is just awful. And I think universities definitely have a part to play in that, in terms of who's doing the practical assessments and what is their biases, but also in terms of educating clinical educators when people are going out into placement, and talking to them about that statistic and getting them to question themselves and work out, why is that happening? Because that's not okay.
So, Arnie, I've never thought about that before. That I'm going to coin that. Mariam.
Sorry, yeah, just to echo that, it's also a huge problem in speech and language therapy, from personal and anecdotal experience. Reset groups notoriously are overly represented by the very few non-white students, which is quite tragic. Lots and lots and lots of terrible experiences on placement, with clinical educators, and also clinical tutors at universities, really, really common in speech and language therapy. And also, yeah, so I don't think much has changed, sadly, across the board, it seems.
Wendy, can I come into you, please?
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to pick up on the points that Arnie was making as well about attainment for students. So currently I'm working as a lecturer, and it's really strange, because I see the BAME students, and if they're like not paying attention, I feel like I have to say to them, like, do you not understand like what this means, or you know that you have to work harder, and almost like feeling like I'm a mum in a way. And yeah, the research, you do see a lot of BAME students coming through, and I want to say, I'm always trying to be positive and say it's changing, but there are people like us that are in teaching positions and that can make a difference. And I think if we always just keep thinking that like we're never going to make it, or we never see people, then we never will. I didn't think I would make it, but I'm here in a way, and I think if we just keep on championing, it's a hard road, it's really hard, and it's a hard fight, but it's a fight worth winning and a fight worth doing. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Wendy, I love that. I love that positivity. Now, Arnie, for me, I can count on probably one hand number of clinical educators across allied health professionals that are people of colour. In my 20 odd years of, being in this profession and taking students, I still take students now, and you're absolutely right. When I was a student, everybody looked like me. Everybody was the same, and I almost adapted my behaviours. I mean, I'm quite common. Obviously, I have an accent, and I almost felt myself like trying to morph into people to get the best marks. And Jackie, I was the complete opposite of you. I was absolutely shit at exams, at coursework, everything was late. I got really bad marks. I excelled on placement, but maybe for all of the reasons that Arnie, you've just touched on as well, because I could fit in very easily because I looked like I should be part of that space. So that is definitely something I'll take away. And that is really powerful, and we really need to get HEIs in on this next conversation, and for all the reasons you said, Wendy, as well, and for what Kieran's just said. So I really value those insights, so thanks for sharing.
Because I think as a student, if you don't know what the rules are, then you can't participate in the same way. So there are all these unwritten rules about how you're supposed to behave on placement that the majority of therapists, AHPs, are white. So if you don't know what the rules are, then how are you supposed to play the game? How are you supposed to do well in that sphere? So there's partly that, and then there's also partly you being judged differently to other people, even if you might be performing in the same way. So there's kind of two sides to it, I think.
And it's even the social questions, isn't it? It's even like just knowing what you should ask your educator, or it's that language that's used. And again, a lot of that's around culture, and it's so I've got Wendy that wants to come in, and then I'm coming down to you, Larry. Wendy.
Yeah, so hi. So just going back to students and students being on placement. So I'm a clinical educator as well, and I see lots of students coming through. And I guess it's about being able to read people. And sometimes I can see a student from a BAME background and just look at them and know exactly what they're feeling, and it being interpreted maybe by other people as them being disinterested or having an attitude. And I think it's the language that we use, and so I'm really a champion for telling people, be careful about the language that you use. So if you say someone's defensive, or someone is aggressive because they're expressing, or they might be a little bit passionate about what they're speaking about. And in a way, when we use those kinds of language, we start to oppress people. And so then students feel like they can't speak out for many reasons. Number one, there's a power difference there anyway, regardless of what your ethnicity is. But particularly for BAME students, you know, as you said, Rachel, like about playing the game. So I was speaking to another colleague, and I was saying, well, you could walk into a room and we wouldn't have to say anything, and automatically there would be a different perception of me than there would be to you, regardless of what my profession is and what your profession is. And I think it needs to come from the top, in that like leaders are embracing everyone. And I'm not saying like necessarily single out like BAME members of staff, but just to be inclusive, in that we're including everyone in conversations. And that if we see that someone is kind of sitting on the outside, on the margins, is to bring them in, because that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed from being a student to being a physio to date, is that kind of like exclusion that goes on, and then it becomes that person's fault, and not the fact that actually maybe people need to feel more welcomed. And it's not I don't know, sometimes I feel like people are really scared to use certain words, so scared to say like black or whatever it is they want to use, and then that becomes a problem. And then in trying to be really PC and trying to be really inclusive, you end up excluding people because you're so scared of what you're going to say and tiptoeing around people. So I think it's about finding an equal balance, really, to be honest with you, about how we include people without making them feel special in a way, because we, you know, it's just about everyone feeling as though we are equal, if that makes sense.
You've absolutely morphed right in there, Wendy, to the next section, which is about how we do this. But Larry, I'm going to come down to you, please, for any comments.
I won't take too long. It was just, I guess, add to some of those things, but perhaps just add that there is possibly a little bit more complexity as well. So in addition to all that's been said, I think this is where the systemic components come into it, but also that kind of intersectionality when we look at actually what's underlying some of these things. So we know that when you look at the system, generally speaking, people from BME backgrounds, not everyone, but a lot of them will be from slightly different socioeconomic backgrounds as well. And actually, what does that mean for studying and combining study with work? And family and all of those other things, and that wouldn't be too dissimilar to people from particularly poor backgrounds. Speaking for physiotherapists, we know that most physiotherapists are typically not from a poor background. So some of those and the challenges that you then have. So there is something about educators, HEIs taking the time to understand the whole person, and just going back to what Wendy was just saying, getting to know them, have conversations, being able to be constructive and supporting them as well in terms of those work. And nobody wants sympathy or to be given marks for the sake of it. We all want to have a fair chance, and that's all that people are asking for. But if you're being judged, often when you're actually working 2 or 3 times as hard to be there, it makes it very difficult to succeed.
Equality, absolutely. Shafaq.
Hi, really interesting point there, Larry. And I just wanted to, because I just wanted to raise one of a point which one of my colleagues experienced while on placement. Her colleagues at placement, she actually basically discovered that they were mimicking her behind her back, and that's a huge self-esteem boost. Like it plunged her self-esteem, had a terrible time during placements, and it's just not acceptable. And a solution for that, I think, for future leaders, white leaders, BAME leaders, we need to include this in the curriculum. We need to include inclusivity and diversity in the curriculum, because depending on where people are coming from, they might never have met a BAME person before. Accents are foreign to them as well. So as opposed to just BAME people bringing in the experiences and educating, our white allies, white counterparts, the white allies need to be educated from the ground root levels about diversity and about the fact that we have international people living in the UK who are part of the system, who are part of the education career, and they will be the future leaders. Our white allies will be the future leaders who will be supporting BAME students. So it's not up to us to be putting ourselves forward that these are our experience. I mean, that is a pro bono as well. And we need our white counterparts, our white friends and allies to be educated about this.
So one of the things I learned, thanks Shafaq, that rings completely true with me. One of my first leadership positions, which was back in London, and I, like I said, I've always taken students, and I was working in a hospital that had a close affiliation with a university, and as part of like my mentorship journey, was doing a lot of work with students. And this particular cohort of students I had, there was one black female physiotherapist that was what I would have classed as shy, and I realized that was the wrong word to use once I took time to get to know her. And I wasn't her educator, I was managing a team, leading a team, and she had a very English name. And she said when she speaks to her educator on the phone before she comes on placement, and she sends that information, that email in, and then the black physiotherapist turns up, you can see their face drop, and you can see people's face drop because they're expecting this white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed physiotherapist to walk in. And she said the effect that has on her every single time she goes on placement. And she says she almost feels like now she's at the point she has to put in her email, by the way, I'm black. So the way that I managed that within my team was to sit down and have that conversation about who to expect, who you're going to expect. They're not going to be, what I now know is what is mirror image of yourself. There's going to be diversity, and to maybe be more aware of the introductory behaviors, because that sets the scene for the entire placement. And then it's about sometimes people around alcohol, around partying, around having boyfriends and girlfriends and all the other things that students like to talk about, that may not be culturally acceptable for another person. And I think that in terms of that inclusivity, diversity training, should it be happening at undergraduate level? Well, again, there's evidence from people here on the panel to say that it should. Kieran, can I come into you, please?
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that educators should almost go into it not expecting someone to almost come in? Because the second that person defies your expectation, you've already kind of got a view, positive or negative, of them. So if you just kind of say, okay, I've got a student, but I'm not going to kind of prejudge what they're going to look or sound like. I'm just going to kind of view them as a student. Do you think that could eliminate possibly some of the like judgments and negative views that educators may have?
Can I be totally honest with you, Kieran, that I think until somebody tells that white educator to do that, they will never think to do that themselves.
Yeah.
Because people haven't acknowledged that that unconscious bias exists. So until that black physiotherapy student, and I won't say her name because she might not want me to, but you know, I learned so much from her as an educator. So this reverse mentoring, which I don't really understand what that is, I'm not going to lie, but maybe that's an example of that, how I can be educated and be taught in a two-way process. So I empowered her by giving her the confidence and the realization that she was as good as everybody else. She just had adapted her behaviors and she didn't have the confidence, and she was stereotyping herself as a black female physiotherapist rather than
the thing about, because we're often referred to as like almost shy or quiet, but a lot of that is us kind of reading the room before we say something, to not kind of to not stand out or say something wrong, or to kind of get viewed in the wrong light. So, or like I've heard, because I haven't been on placement yet because of obviously the whole situation, but I've heard a lot of experiences of other physios being referred to as like, oh, you're too shy, or you don't speak enough, or you're too quiet. But that's almost them kind of just assessing the situation before they speak. But it's like they're already prejudged, which kind of limits their growth on that placement, if that makes sense.
That's exactly why I said I used the word shy when I first had made that first judgment about her. And my first impression, shy is the wrong word to use, because she wasn't shy. She was just disempowered, and she, like you said, she didn't want to come across as the typical stereotype that she had experience of being stereotyped before.
Yeah, because then you become like, oh, the loud black person or the problematic person, and then it's kind of like almost we have to reduce or like conform and like lose parts of our identity or culture to navigate certain spaces, because there's the idea of like playing the game that I've been told about that, and like you have to play the game to get into these certain places. But why should you have to play a game? Like, why should I have to conform to a certain way? Obviously clinically I understand that, but in terms of like personal skills, like even just with the educator, why should I have to play a game to get a good mark, if that makes sense?
Mariam.
Yeah, sorry, it was just really powerful hearing everybody speak. I think it's space to reflect. I think it's fascinating because doesn't this speak to a much bigger problem where we're thinking about kind of the power imbalance that maybe a student or a trainee is kind of engaging with their practice educator in, and how that leads to kind of quite detrimental experiences in terms of that training and that experience. And actually, I think what it speaks to is, and what it really highlights is, where those systemic inequalities are being reproduced within healthcare itself. Because if I, as a student speech and language therapist, am having a terrible time with my practice educator, my clinical educator, I mean, can I even begin to imagine what it's like for non-white service users that person is working with, where that power balance is even, more, it's bigger, it's a vaster difference. And so actually I don't understand how this this speaks to so much more. And if people are training as healthcare professionals, and this is how they're doing their job in terms of supporting junior colleagues, I would be deeply, deeply alarmed for the people they're actually working with in terms of their professional capacity.
But this is where it continues, and this is where we see this pattern continuing and being socially reinforced as we go through the professional hierarchy. I don't like to use leadership, it's more the management structures, isn't it? Because it's ingrained in probably undergraduate, from what we've heard, all the way through the management type, all the way to the top. And if the top think that, they're never going to then influence anything below that. And to get to the top, you have to be like that. So this is this whole endemic reinforcement. Wendy, can I come into you? And then if anyone else wants to make any more comments on that.
Yeah, so just going off your point, Kieran, sorry, my cat has just come in, sorry, about playing the game and having to like lose parts of your identity. And I totally agree with you, because I felt like that for a long time, and I played the game as a student, and it didn't actually really work out for me on a lot of placements, you know. And I heard things like, oh, you need to watch your face, like, because I was really quiet. But as you say, it was more about reading the room, and I guess part of that was my upbringing as well. So my mum was a nurse, and she always, like, she drummed into all of us, yeah, you have to work twice as hard, if not 10 times as hard, you know, and you can't be perceived in a certain way, and she'd want us to speak a certain way, and we would like rebel and want to be really like Cockney, and she'd be like, you know. And so like then we were conditioned that you have to fit in. But actually it's about change. And if we always try to fit a mold that we don't fit, for the generations coming behind us, it will never change. So just for you, Kieran, I wanted to say that don't feel like you have to lose part of your identity, because what you bring is you add something. We all add something to the fabric of life. And that's what I eventually realized, that actually I could go into this place and I could just be me, and I could just be, yeah, different. Because different sometimes is good, and different makes, you know, it just makes the world go around. And so although we're talking about like being included, and we're talking about all the negative stuff that comes from people being racist or carrying unconscious bias, is that the change begins with us as well. And we hold part of that responsibility. And we have to take that responsibility. And actually sometimes just pushing who you are is enough to encourage change. But if we kind of in the background go like, yeah, I accept me as I am, but when I go out there, I'm gonna play the game, then it's never gonna change. So I think we need to start to feel empowered. Yes, we need people to help us to feel empowered, but actually we have the ability to do that. And if we start to feel empowered and start to act on that, then change happens. But you don't have to play the game, Kieran, because you're enough as you are. We're all enough as we are.
Absolutely. I mean, look at him here. I mean, this is a role model right here in the making. You're going to be like inundated, Kieran, honestly. So, go on.
So I was just going to add to everything Wendy's just said. Being different actually improves patient care. It improves, and I think we sometimes, of course, there's a humanity aspect which is just as important, but also what we have to also remember. So I was on a call today with NHS England, and one of the conversations we was having is about the lack of research evidence into health inequalities in MSK. Well, actually, that's because the people making those decisions often don't think about some of those things. So being different brings a lot to everyone. It actually makes things better. It's not just because it's a nice human thing to do, which it is. It's also because it makes people's lives better. You know, so there's tons of evidence around, you know, if people from a BME background see a clinician from a BME background, they're much more likely to engage in their healthcare. They're much more likely to actually come to their appointments, or kind of seek advice from them around certain things, around certain values and beliefs. So I think that message is also got to be taken forward really strongly. And I don't know if you're going to comment to this, Rachel, around things that we can do. I was reflecting as some of the conversations were going on, and whilst I don't know many places, I think there are some places that have got it as close to right as possible. Places like North East London Foundation Trust, from I've never worked there, but from the stuff that I've read and that I know, and kind of amplifying the voices of places that have got it right, understanding the approaches they've taken would be a really useful thing.
Absolutely. Shafak.
Last point, especially to all the students. My supervisor, who got me set as a private speech therapist, said one really important thing which set the ball rolling for me. She said, make your identity your strength. And I think that is the best piece of advice that I could have gotten. And I really want you guys to make your identity your strength. Just go for it.
I love that. Yes, well done. David, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, sorry, just a quick point. I'm very fortunate at the moment to be on a program called 150 Leaders, which really works to promote diversity and inclusivity. You know, you walk into the room and it's a really diverse mix. And one of the real key points that was driven home that actually is that diversity improves team performance. And that's something I don't think is probably widely known enough, that actually when people look to create a team that looks like themselves because they believe that will create harmony and that will be more, when actually one of the research that one of the lecturers came and talked to us about, a lady called Stacey Johnson at the University of Nottingham, Professor Stacey Johnson, sorry, at the University of Nottingham, she was saying that their work doing really highlights that actually diversity within teams really improves the performance within teams, and that's something that really needs to be highlighted to leaders of all levels, that actually if they can look to improve diversity, actually their team is effective, not less effective.
Thank you, David. Very powerful from our student contingency there, absolutely. Okay, I'm aware we've been talking for nearly an hour, and I really want to now try and move on to what needs to happen next. So the third podcast are really trying to bring together, and we definitely need HEIs in on this conversation for the next step. And we definitely need to bring in some of our professional BAME networks who have some influence from within the professional groups as well. But what really needs to happen next to truly address racial inequality within our AHP workforce, within the new leader kind of population? Does anyone have any thoughts? Mariam?
This is a thought that I've had more recently as I become a more comfortable band 6, I guess, is I think leadership is a very nebulous idea. And I think how we understand it it doesn't have to follow the traditional leadership structures that kind of institutions impose onto us. I think I would urge all of my fellow non-white colleagues within healthcare to really reflect on our positionality and understand what it is that we bring to the table, and just how valuable that is. It might be threatening for the structures in which we exist, but valuable in the sense of what we bring to patient care and the people that we work with and the value that we add to their lives. And I think that depending on what's brought you into the profession and what motivates you and what keeps you here, I think you can begin to understand leadership in kind of unconventional ways as well. And I think leadership can be just as much bottom up as it needs to be top down. Like, I think you are in charge of the space that you occupy and the role that you take up. You are a leader within that. You are just as much in a position to affect change in the institution that you work in. And I think that can feel hard at times, and it might look and feel very different for you depending on who you are and where you are. But I think it's a very real possibility for that to be realised and actioned in the capacity that you do have.
Yeah, new leaders are the change. That's the thing. They are the change that is needed. Wendy, I'm going to come to you, then I'm going to come down to Kieran.
Yeah, so I totally agree that we do have the power. Everyone has the power to make the change. But I think one thing that leaders can do is to accept being maybe called out on behaviours that are maybe not right, or that encourage bias or show bias, and to not be offended by being told that you've offended someone, like someone from an ethnic background, with your behaviour or the things that you are saying. And I think that's really important, that leaders are open to kind of feedback about, you know, how they're being perceived by other people.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a variety of feedback mechanisms, because one mechanism doesn't work for all. So whether that's confidential, whether that's the 360 feedback models, whether that's through someone else. I think that you're absolutely right, Wendy. That's so, because we'll have these traditional formal feedback loops and appraisals and one-way appraisal systems, and the great leaders that we've all probably hopefully experienced have seek that uncomfortable conversation. They seek that constructive criticism from people, because that's the only thing that will make you better, and make you, you know, a better person.
Absolutely.
Kieran? And then Larry.
So there's kind of two ways I'd approach this. So one from like an HEI point of view, and then one from almost like above that to the workplace and beyond. So I think universities have a great deal to do. So even in terms of diversifying your curriculum, so like how many of the case studies that you're taught, how diverse are they? Like I can speak so on behalf of my one, like a lot of the case studies are kind of the same group of people. And for example, where we are in the country, we have placements in London. So imagine if you've got students who grew up in a white middle class background and then go into a place in the heart of London and don't know the cultural implications of, say, for example, you meet a Muslim man who wants to be able to kneel on the ground and pray. If you don't know culturally how important that is to him, you might disregard that as part of your treatment. So it's like almost like cultural competence. If that was a thing, we should implement that. I think also what are universities actively doing to make physiotherapy as accessible as a profession as possible? So I know we've got a learning support fund in the NHS that's coming in this year, I think, which is great. But there are other kind of socio-economical factors that play into it. So it's very hard. So I find it very hard to find work experience, and obviously that's a prerequisite for getting onto the course. So what can we actively do to make work experience less of a like tedious task to acquire? Because obviously if you present your personal statement and your application with 0 work experience, they're going to throw your application in the bin, but you need that to even get through the door. So I'd say we need to do that as well. And then in terms of beyond that, I'd really like the CSP to kind of get some data, because with data we can kind of measure change over time. So I'd like them to gather some data about the amount of just the amount of physiotherapists, and not just BAME. Like I want them to be specific, so Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. Do it by location and how many are in say band 5, band 6, band 7, because then you have a real gauge and idea of where the inequalities are. And you can also use that as almost an outcome measure, because we talk about outcome measures as physios. You can use that data and in 5 years see, right, has what we've done changed? But then to make change, we need equity. So obviously to get equality, you need equity. So equity is like the tools and policies that you're going to implement to get these groups that are experiencing the inequality onto the same footing. But it's what are we going to do to get to that place that I'm asking in the CSV, basically.
Yeah, wow. Kieran, Larry, come on in.
Some great suggestions there by Kieran. So I agree with this. So I suppose I look at this in multiple ways. I always look at it from kind of starting with me and thinking what I can do, and Arnie's in on this. So as BME leaders, whatever that means. So when we're in those positions, what can we do to support? So we've talked about perhaps a coaching and mentoring offer, which we're working on, and we'll try to do and deliver to support particularly young undergraduate or students as they kind of come through the profession. I think there's something also around just recognizing that there's multiple ways to approach this, but until diversity and inclusion is a board level concern, I can't really see how organizations will change significantly. I think obviously there's cultural change which needs to happen, and there's lots of kind of OD approaches that can be taken, but I also think it needs to be taken seriously by having experts, and it doesn't to be expert, not just a token gesture at board level, to make sure diversity and inclusion is taken very seriously and taken forward with the resources that are required. That includes data and all the other things that Kieran just mentioned. I think in terms of simple things, there are things that our ally colleagues can do. Simple things like reverse mentoring can be really helpful. So go out, seek a colleague and ask for some mentoring from someone who is less senior than you to kind of shift that power dynamic and get some experience. Provide opportunities for students to have things like action learning sets or kind of group circled coaching, be able to have those open and frank conversations and really change the culture within your organizations. Those things can happen from a very small level, so having 2 or 3 people having those open conversations, to very large whole team, whole organizational change.
Absolutely, and I think there's a common theme that's coming through some of the suggestions here. Arnie, can I come in to you, please?
Yeah, so just to echo some of those points that Lara is making. So I think it's really important, as he said, to have BAME people on board level, but also I think for people to join their BAME networks within their organisations, within their profession. And I think you have a stronger voice when you have more of you speaking. So I think it's about forming those connections, finding people who, because there aren't very many of us in the profession. So actually, if you want to have, someone to look up to or someone to help you, then actually those networks are a great place to start. And I think, lobbying your professional bodies and meeting, if the chief exec wants to meet with you, or you email them and say, I want to meet with you to talk to you about this, see what response you get. Because actually I put something out on Twitter about this podcast and I've got a one-to-one with my chief exec in a couple of weeks, which is absolutely terrifying. But I know that I've got her ear, and actually I can share with her all of these ideas because she's made the time to listen to me. So I think reaching out, getting good connections. And I think, like Larry spoke about, that sort of opportunity to get coaching. And I'm sort of training to become a coach. And I think I'm probably biased on this, but actually it really helps you to explore your identity, your sense of self. I've had coaching myself, and I found that my confidence and my sort of my sense of identity is just a lot stronger now. And I think for BAME people, if that's something that you're feeling that you're having to repress all the time, or you're having to change who you are, change how you are, then actually I think coaching can be really powerful just to enable you and empower you to be the person you are.
Absolutely. Jackie?
Yeah, I think this idea as well of mentorship, coaching, etc. is quite powerful, but I think there's a practical side as well. So, thinking about who's listening to this, if somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to get, I'm seeking coaching, etc., it's giving them the permission or the space or the time to go and do this work, because that is important work. And it's probably more important than going on, doing their, I can't even think of a practical example, but, they go away to do case series discussions, etc. But space for, mentoring, reciprocal mentoring, coaching, all this kind of, there's opportunities out there. But for people to make this connection, we need to have that space, because like you said, the load is already there. There's a lot of work going on. And there needs to be some practical recognition that this needs some, space.
And it's about the managers within them teams recognizing that this is a priority. It's not an add-on. It's not something that should be optional. It's essential in this space we're in right now, in our moment in lives. And it's recognizing the importance of that and the added value. And it's about getting permission, because a lot of people are just held back because no, you're not allowed. And this is the stories we hear about people having to go in their own time and pay for these types of things. And the things we talked about in the more senior leaders podcast was around, because there's very few BAME role models, sometimes people are asked to be doing multiple things, and we need to support our BAME senior leaders as well to go out there and do that and take some of the workloads, take some of the responsibility, some of the stuff that we can do that we can't do, if that makes sense. And it's about working collectively together to recognize that. So I completely agree, Jackie, and this is where it becomes a whole system understanding, doesn't it? Because if you've got one part of the system that gets it but the other one doesn't, and they're the enabler, that'll never happen. And that's where we've fell short time and time again, in my opinion, within the kind of management and leadership circles. Kieran, can I come into you?
Yeah, I was just going to touch on the idea of mentorship. So I think it's a great idea on a kind of management level, but as well as on a student level. So I'm part of two groups, so the Cultural Health Club, which I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, and the ACPT. So before that, I felt a bit isolated. Like, I didn't really know of any Black senior physiotherapists. I didn't know any. So I got assigned to a mentor on that, and just from like one conversation, you feel so much more comfortable and relaxed in the profession you're in, because you've seen someone they just look like you. That's the simplest thing. And then on top of that, they've got the same like cultural, like they understand you more than just on a clinical level, like they can culturally relate to you as well. So the idea of mentorship, I think, is a great thing, because it empowers you, and it kind of it almost motivates you to think, right, I can do that because I can see someone that looks like me doing that. So I think we should push for mentorship as much as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And have you got did I see you have a GoFundMe page for cultural
Yeah, so like you said, a lot of the kind of, say, band 5s need to like fund their own courses and stuff to get to these band 6 interviews to kind of show they demonstrate the leadership and confidence skills required. So yeah, our GoFundMe page is kind of to raise the funds to say we can provide the money to go on these courses and stuff like that. So because we don't want to rely on people to kind of do it for us, because it hasn't happened. So if we can raise the funds to do it ourselves, we can say, right, there's a band 5 that wants to progress to band 6, but maybe they need to go on a course to kind of improve a certain skill. We can fund part of that course to make the process as seamless as possible.
You know, I feel so inspired by you tonight, but I also feel incredibly sad that even has to exist. But sorry, I'm going off lip here a little bit, but if anyone has been inspired by Kieran tonight and as part of their contribution for these free podcasts, I would really reach out and say donate, make us even small donation to the cultural help. We'll put a link up, Kieran, and that you know that could be your contribution back to what you've listened to tonight.
Yeah, so essentially it's a group of Black, Asian and minority ethnic health professionals, so not just physios. And then so our aim is to kind of increase health literacy among populations that may not have as much as others, but also kind of empower these health professionals to kind of advance them to get into positions where we can address inequality and stuff like that. So it's a really positive group, I'd say.
And this, my friends, is the leaders of our next profession. So if we can't support people like Kieran in that initiative, then, you know, we really need to take a good hard look inside ourselves. So we'll definitely get that link up, Kieran. Thanks so much. So I want to start coming round the group now. I don't want to have the last words. There is far too many things that I've written down tonight to summarise, as we normally would. I make it my promise to try and get engagement with the HEIs and the networks on the next podcast to really start getting some action points down. This isn't demanding, this isn't a hostile environment. This is about having the conversation about how we together as a collective can make things better and be better. So watch this space for that. It's going to be at the end of the month. So if I could come to people for closing comments, please. If I can come up to you, Shafaq, please, first.
Yes, here I am. Thank you, Rachel. Just want to say thank you, everybody. I feel really, really empowered and enlightened and educated by what everyone shared. And I hope anything I've said, I didn't mean to offend anybody, and I hope it's applicable and helpful to my other counterparts and my allies. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Larry.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having us, and hope the contribution from this group is meaningful and makes a difference.
Me too, Larry, definitely. Kieran.
So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I hope those in positions those in the positions that can make change are listening, because who better to listen to than the people who have lived experiences of these problems, basically.
Absolutely, Kieran. Thank you. Mariam.
Yeah, sorry, so many thoughts. It's really hard to summarize. I think what I'd like to just kind of stress, I guess, is where I'm at in my own kind of personal and professional journey is actually what is leadership and why leadership. And actually, I think I desperately want to be part of a generation that dares to reimagine healthcare. And I think that comes with understanding and questioning all of the structures that currently impose boundaries on us, and can kind of force us to think that this is the only way of organising our systems and how we manage our resources. And actually, if all I aspire to do is to do what has already been done by the band 7s and the band 8s that already exist in my profession, then I'm not quite sure that's what I'm here to do. I think I'm here to use my positionality to understand how we can do this differently. And that might also mean challenging existing leadership structures in the hierarchical and structural nature that they currently exist in.
Absolutely. Big up, Mariam. I love that. Arnie, come on in.
I don't know what to say now. How am I going to match that? So I think for me, leadership is about change. It's about leading change and about being the change. And I think that's a call for all of us, just as human beings, BAME or not BAME, about trying to influence things and make change happen, but also to kind of push the boundaries, like Mariam was saying, so to be more confident, to challenge the structures, but also to challenge individuals. And for me, the greatest thing is about having connectivity, so being able to have those connections with individuals, to be able to have that sort of relationship where actually you can challenge them on what they're saying, in a way that they're not going to then just be completely defensive, but to have an open conversation where you're talking as two people who can be open, honest, and be vulnerable with each other. And I think building those relationships is important generally, but then especially when we're having these conversations with people.
Absolutely. Jackie?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. I think as everyone's been summing up, a phrase that's coming up for me is this idea of standing on the shoulders of giants. And I know that this might not feel like the situation right now with the world being in flux, but there's lots of work that's happened and is happening in this space. You know, there's new players coming in, like that Cultural Health Club. So I want people to kind of be aware that they're not alone entirely in this. And these opportunities are not always visible, but for example, you know, the NHS Leadership Academy does have a specific stream that really focuses on this idea of cultural competence and supporting people who are historically disadvantaged and really finding their way up. And that's one of the things that I did. And I am forever grateful for that opportunity. And I just want people to know it exists. And if anyone wants to know more about it, I'm happy to talk about it till the cows come home.
Thank you, Jackie. Wendy, I'm coming to you next.
Mute myself. So firstly, just to say thank you for giving us this platform to speak on. It's been really enlightening, and it has been really empowering. And it's really nice to see the change. I've seen such a change over the years. And just to say that together we are stronger, and if we just keep on championing for the right things, we can get there.
Thank you, Wendy. David, are you still with us?
I am, yes, yeah. I just want to say thank you to the rest of the panel for taking their time to share their experiences, their stories, their knowledge, and you know, I just hope that for the future that I can at least be a part to try and help, try and be a part of the solution rather than continuing to be a part of the problem. So that's what I've really got to say. So I just thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So I'm going to bring this podcast to a close. As usual, if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave comments. If you're watching this on Twitter, please, my messages are open. Please leave feedback. If you want to reach out to any of the panel members, are all tagged in, or come through me and I can hook you up with people. So thanks so much to the panel tonight. This what is now a ridiculous time on a Thursday evening. We're going to be putting it out live tonight, no edits. And thank you from the bottom of the heart. You're all amazing. And Kieran, I've got my eye on you for sure. Thank you so much.